SEC preview part. Duh.
Say it, Ty. Duh. Yeah.
I got a request out on Discord that I never stopped doing that.
Oh, good.
It seems like it's been a big hit among the
Well, that's the power of signing up to be a verbaler at verballers.com. You get to control what Ty says. You get to pull the puppet strings.
Not exactly, but not opposed to that either, Dan.
Okay.
Not opposed to that. We appreciate everybody's support out there. I am Ty. He is Dan. This is the Solid Verbal. This is part 2 of our ongoing SEC preview series, really of our ongoing College Football 2024 preview series. Right now, we've got both the ACC and the Big 12 in the books. We've got part 1 of the SEC where we talk through our contender tiers also in the books. You can go back and listen to that episode. It's the last one out there on the feed. Today, though, we're actually going to start talking about specific SEC teams, and we're going to do so with a focus on these 8. Remember, there are 16 teams now in the SEC. We're going to talk today about Georgia and Texas, about Ole Miss and Mizzou, about Texas A&M and Florida, and about Mississippi State and Vanderbilt to close things out.
Yes.
So 4 for you that you focused on, 4 for me that I focused on a little bit more intently as well. So excited to get into the nitty-gritty about these teams and much, much more.
Hey, sorry for the quick interruption, but it'd be incredible if you considered subscribing to the Solid Verbal YouTube channel right down below.
Where do you think you'd like to start with this discussion?
I think we should start with Texas, because they sort of encompass a lot of what's new and interesting about this conference. And we're not doing Alabama this episode, so we're not starting with the defending champ. I'm sure we'll get to Georgia next, but I don't know. Let's start with the new. And the new with Texas is they're here. The new with Texas is that they've joined the SEC. They have an SEC schedule. And with Texas and Oklahoma, of course, comes the end of divisions. So everybody's schedule looks sort of different, right? There's protected matchups, but I don't know. Divisionless football is a new thing, and Texas is one of those teams. So Texas brings back a ton as a Big 12 playoff team.
Can I pause you for a second?
Please.
Dan? You're doing this again to me.
You said where should we start?
There's only one thing you love, Danny. That's danger.
The SEC.
We need to work on our communication here. I was waiting for the
don't give
pause
me a runway
so that I could shoehorn that sound in, but it's okay.
Okay, sorry. I apologize.
It's okay.
I'm just very
We're
excited
good.
to talk SEC football.
No, I know. I
Excuse
appreciate
me.
that.
Okay. Can I get back to what I was saying,
Please
Ty?
do. I apologize, sir.
Okay.
Continue.
I'm very excited about Texas football. And the things that make me excited are the experience, that Sark has been there, that there's continuity on the staff. Look, it's not to echo the laziest talking point of all, but it all starts up front. And Texas is entering into this conference with, if not the best offensive line, a conversation that they have the best offensive line in this country, especially, or in the conference at least, anchored by Kelvin Banks, left tackle, All-American. He's probably going to be a top 5-7 pick or whatever in the 2025 NFL draft. They should be able to run. They should be able to throw, and they should be able to throw replacing a lot, both at receiver and tight end. But when you add in Isaiah Bond from Alabama, Jonte Cook, former 5-star, Silas Bolden from Oregon State, Ryan Wingo, a 5-star coming in, there are too many options for this passing game not to work really, really well. Considering it's Sark's bread and butter, considering the talent here, considering the experience, considering the line protecting Quinn Ewers and maybe Arch Manning if Quinn Ewers goes down, there's very little way, even with Texas's schedule, and I know Georgia's on this schedule, that they're not going to have a top 10, 12 offense in America, if not higher.
Oh, they're going to score 38 points a game with this offense.
They're in a great starting place there. What I really like about where Texas is at is we knew what was the weak point of Texas. We knew the danger to Texas last year. By the end of last year, and seeing certain quarterbacks have success, was they weren't getting home off of the edge, and their DBs were losing one-on-one battles deep. They were giving up big pass plays, and it wasn't just on the secondary, it wasn't just on the pass rush. But if you have a pass rush, it's easier on the DBs. If you have sticky Will Johnson type corners, it becomes easier for everybody to get to the quarterback and to, get the defense off the field. Texas has developed youth really well at all 3 levels, and guys who are rotation guys step in along the line, at the linebacker spot, at both linebacker spots, really, and in the secondary. They also went into the portal once again to build up depth in the secondary, to build up depth at edge rusher. Trey Moore is that big name from UTSA. They were after, I mean, this is sort of a common theme in the league right now, is building up beefy depth, at defensive tackle, which Texas did its best to do, whiffed on a couple of transfer targets, but brought in guys. And by and large, Texas should be in a very good spot. Now, their schedule's not the easiest in terms of what they have in a row, and I think there are trappy moments. They have Oklahoma and Georgia, I think, in consecutive weeks.
They do.
So
yeah, they do.
Oklahoma, of course, in Dallas, and Georgia is
in
Austin.
Texas. Yeah, it's in Texas.
It's in Austin. Still, that's a horrific back-to-back for most teams. We'll see if it is for Texas, but there's a reason they're a contender. There's a reason that, okay, so their defensive tackles aren't quite where they were last year with Byron Murphy and Tavondre Sweat. Very few teams, can say that they are. So I think Texas is in a great spot. I really, really do. We'll see linebacker depth. We'll see defensive tackle depth. And that's when you start getting into the end of the year. Their run looks like Florida at Arkansas, Kentucky at A&M. Getting that Kentucky defense a week before traveling to College Station. It's just, I don't know if it's going to be trickier as a look-ahead spot playing against Kentucky or against A&M after in a body blow spot. I mean, the emotion will be there. The motivation will be there as they reignite that rivalry with A&M. But you really can't look at Texas and say, ooh, here's a major, major question. And so, yes, it's a transition to a new conference. Sark doesn't have, the experience game planning against all of these defensive coordinators and going to all of these stadiums. But look, they go to Alabama and beat them on the road.
Well, he kind of does, though. He was in the SEC before he was at Texas.
Yes, he was. But I'm saying with this roster, with this place, whatever.
Yeah.
But that's me nitpicking. That's me that's a half truth at best.
I mean, I just think it says an awful lot about the job that Sark's done. That
Sure.
They lost their top running back, their top 5 wide receivers, both Sweat and Murphy off the line, who you mentioned earlier on the
and they lost the
defensive
running
side.
back 2/3 of the way into the year last year. Yeah.
But still, the point stands. There's a lot walking out the door, and their over-under is still 10.5 going into what amounts to a much tougher conference. Now, the over-under is 10.5. I would not bet on Texas going over 10.5. And it's not because I don't like the team. It's because so much is changing.
Right.
I like their talent. But to your point of, okay, they've got Oklahoma and Georgia on back-to-back weeks. Okay, they've got Kentucky in that defense a week before squaring off against Texas A&M. We don't know yet what the bumps in the road are going to be for this team going into this conference. I think we can assume on some level that they're well-positioned. We know the talent is there. We know they obviously made it to the playoff a year ago. My bet is that they're going to make it again, even if I'm not going to bet the over here. I still feel really good about this team, but there's, I think, a fair amount in the minutia of this season that we'll come to know as this thing goes on that we can't fully gauge out how Texas is going to fully adapt to the SEC right now.
No, and look, if we're talking about Texas as a 2023 playoff team last year, that path is different.
It is.
Now,
Completely
they beat
different.
Alabama on the road. But the week-to-week path in getting, and this is no disrespect intended, because there are a lot of quality teams on this listing of teams, but going through Kansas State, getting Oklahoma State, Texas Tech, a lot of teams that just don't have the depth, don't recruit on the level of a lot of the teams on Texas's new schedule. It's a different animal. And the other concern I would have with Texas, that's nothing they can control. Texas can't control how Kansas recruits. They can't control how TCU recruits and whatever. But the other animal here is something that I think we put in the past a little bit, so 2 years ago they struggle in the second halves of games, and we're just like, man, why are they losing like this? Why are they not scoring this? Why are they scoring 3 points in this second half loss to an inferior roster? Last year against Washington specifically, you're like, well, the running backs are fumbling a little, but they're running for 7 yards a carry, and they've abandoned the run in the second half. And they're putting it all on Quinn Ewers, and now Washington has this ability to sort of pin their ears back and look at a more predictable second half Texas offense. The question then is Sark toe-to-toe as an offensive coordinator in a big game, and proved against Alabama on the road for sure last year. Is it going to be an every week thing that Texas either survives in spite of itself or loses something that they might not have had to because of, 3 weird 3-and-outs in the second half against Georgia, against Kentucky, against A&M or something like that. That would be the concern as things become more difficult.
Yeah. And look, I also think playing this type of schedule brings into focus the fact that Quinn Ewers has had some health concerns in the past. Now, they've got Arch Manning behind him.
Yep.
Who hasn't played meaningful snaps. I think they feel good about their quarterback depth for obvious reasons. But one of those other points that I think is worth mentioning at this early juncture, and more to my point of we don't fully know what that transition into the SEC will look like. We assume it will go rather smoothly and that Texas is positioned well to deal with it.
Yeah.
But who knows? Who knows?
It's also, I haven't been in a few years, but I've been to a few Texas games. It's not always an SEC, the best of SEC, even though we consider Texas in this grouping. The environment at DKR, it's a little quieter. It's a little less rowdy. It's a little less electric. It's a little bit less of a frenzy. Maybe it's changed the last few years as they've gotten better, but it's not exactly the hornet's nest that is multi-sport field, Ty.
Let's go to Georgia then. I mean, when we did our last episode, it seems the two teams that we felt best about were Texas and obviously Georgia. It goes without saying Georgia. 13-1 last season, lost to Alabama in the SEC title game. We'll talk about Bama on the next episode. Then went to the Orange Bowl and smoked Florida State by 60 points.
Yeah.
Just killed them. Obviously, there were reasons for that, okay? But Georgia's a very good team, and Georgia was kind of at full strength going into that game. So now going into this new season, this power vacuum that was created by Nick Saban walking away, Georgia's suddenly the top dog. And they've been really good for a couple years running now. They're at a dynasty level with this program. Kirby Smart has done a really good job. And there's no reason to think that they won't get there again. This is probably one of those times where I'm supposed to have a hot take. I've got the volcano behind me, take a Toa. I've got other takes that we'll throw in that volcano, and I'll play my sound as we go through the course of this episode and the one after it. But, I don't have a take. I don't have anything spicy that's going to rack up downloads, views, or whatever. Georgia is take-proof at this point from my standpoint. And
okay. At least for on-field stuff. Yeah.
For on-field stuff, yes, of course. Okay. For on-field stuff, I'm not going down that rabbit hole. The best
I'm glad
way
you
I
said
can
not
describe,
going down that road, because that would have been inappropriate. Continue.
Not going down that road. Beautiful.
Yeah.
The best way I can describe this team on the field is that they are painfully yet scary boring.
Okay.
It's boring. It's boring. We already kind of know what we're going to get. And that's despite the loss of Brock Bowers, Ladd McConkey, and 2 guys in the backfield and many others. They're 29th nationally in returning production. So they lost a lot, but still rank very highly in terms of what they have coming back, which is something of a rarity, if I'm being honest with you here. An elite team from a year ago that has this much back. Part of the reason why I like Michigan last season as a popular pick to win the national championship. I wasn't alone in that, but they had so much back from their team in 2022. Obviously, there was a lot to like in 2023. They end up winning the national championship. Not to be cliche, but the same is true for Georgia as it was for Texas. Where does it start, Dan? It starts up front.
Sure.
And this is going to be maybe the 4th straight year where they've got an offensive line that's a finalist for the Joe Moore Award, which they give out to the best offensive line in the country.
Yep.
You can you can just sort of work backwards from there, man. It's not that complicated. You got a Heisman caliber quarterback in Carson Beck. They bring over Trevor Etienne from Florida, going to run the rock. They've got a stable of running backs if it's not Trevor Etienne. Plenty of guys they could count on. The receiver room may be a bit weaker now with the dismissal of Ra Thomas due to his legal issues, but still Dominic Lovett and Dylan Bell and Colby Young, who comes up from Miami. London Humphreys, who was, a big
Vandy
play guy from Vandy. He comes in. Oh, and Oscar Delp, by the way. All right, we're going to talk a lot about Brock Bowers is leaving. He was maybe one of the better tight ends in the history of the game. Oscar Delp is pretty good. He was good in relief effort when he had to step in for Brock Bowers on a full-time basis here and there last season. Now he's going to be the dude.
Yeah. Ra Thomas suspended indefinitely was the last thing I saw.
Off the team.
He's gone.
He's off the team. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I'm just listing off names here. That's not the point of this, but
Right.
it kind of is the point of it, right? Like, if you have been following this team or this show or this damn sport for the last handful of years, you know most of the names are just rattled off. Not a whole lot of unknown quantities, and it's kind of the same deal on defense, too. Loaded up front with Mikael Williams, who might be a first-round draft pick, will be a first-round draft pick. Nazir Stackhouse. There's a ton of experience in the linebacking core, high-level talent behind them on the depth chart. If anything's weak, I guess it's the secondary, but I'm really reaching here. I'm really splitting hairs. Georgia's weak spots. Yeah. Georgia's weak spots would be many other teams' strengths.
Of course.
And that goes without saying. So, again, I wish I had something spicier for you, but I don't.
Well, it's the schedule. I think it's not a weak spot per se, because everybody that they play is more terrified of Georgia than Georgia is of it. But I think, again, if you have the schedule in front of you, it's like maybe the most difficult first 5 weeks of defense that a team might play in the country. Again, if you're like an average, your replacement level team, there's no team that I think has a more difficult. Is it for the first 5 weeks? It's Clemson, Kentucky. Who else is on there? Bama.
Clemson, Kentucky, Alabama, Auburn are the big ins, and then as you get into week 6, week 7, on the road at Texas, that's on October the 19th. That's obviously going to be the marquee matchup of the weekend. So defense, not really in short supply through the first half of the Georgia schedule. And it is a more difficult schedule than we saw last year, than we saw the year prior. It certainly is. I think many of these teams that are on this thing have upped their game. But I still really like Georgia's chances just because, again, so many known quantities. There's a reason that even with the schedule, 10.5 is the over-under.
Right.
I don't think I'd take the bet, honestly. I don't think I would. I love Georgia. I think Georgia's winning the SEC. But I'm not taking that bet. It's not because I think they're overrated. It's because there are some tough runs here. That neutral siter against Clemson in week 1. Weird things happen in week 1.
Yeah.
At Bama, you could talk more about Bama on the next episode. Still a lot of talent there. At Texas, at Ole Miss, anytime you go on the road in this conference, strange things can happen. By the way, that Ole Miss game is a week after the Florida rivalry and a week before a home game against Tennessee. Talk about more beef on the schedule. They've got Auburn at home a week after the Bama game.
Yeah, and Auburn gave them a lot of trouble last year, yeah.
So I think despite the fact that I really like Georgia to win this conference, to get back to that SEC title game, I think there's a good chance Georgia drops one of these and they end up 11-1. They still could hit that over. I don't know if they're losing 2 games, but I think there's a really high likelihood that they end up losing one of them along the way. They still end up in the SEC title game. I still think they win it. Obviously, they go to the playoff, maybe with a first-round bye. But the conference is harder, and this schedule is harder.
Right.
So
who's doing? I'm putting you on the spot here.
Yeah.
Who's doing like the SEC on ABC? Who is the main voice of that? Like the big game of the week? Is it Joe Tess?
I'm assuming it's going to be Joe Tess. I don't know.
Okay. My question is this. Is there a chance, like come week 4, week 5, whatever, that whoever is calling Georgia a few weeks into the year is going to mention that you can tell the Georgia offense for the first time in quite some time really does miss Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey because of the safety valve and almost like how not underrated because they've gotten a ton of attention, and that we just assume that because Georgia recruits this well, because they've hit the portal as well as they have, that they'll figure it out, which I think is a totally fair assumption. You don't get to be this good this often without figuring it out. But that was the mainstay over 2 different quarterbacks, 3 different seasons in which they were excellent consecutively, that even with Brock Bowers' injury last year, it was one of your favorite kinds of injuries. What did they call it? The procedure?
The old tightrope, yeah.
The tightrope, yeah. That, and Ladd McConkey was injured as well, and they had like 90-something catches between them last year. It was like 120 the year before. That the successful Georgia offense, as much as they leaned on power rushing and bruising teams up, that so much of the explosivity of this offense ran through Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey, and that Not that they're underrated, but that we're perhaps underrating their departures.
Yeah,
little
well,
bit.
look, and they were mainstays. They were a big part of that offense, but to the point they were both hurt. And Georgia
they were both dealing with a bunch. Yeah.
They needed to figure out how to win without those guys, and they did. More often than not, they absolutely did. I think the guys that they're backfilling with are fine. I don't know if anyone's Brock Bowers, but Oscar Delp was really good in a relief effort. Some of these guys that Georgia went and got in the transfer portal at the receiver position, it's clear that they knew they wanted to beef up that side of things. They knew that they were going to have some folks walking out the door. So I think they'll be just fine. My expectation is it will be something you hear the announcing crews talk about early, but maybe not so much late.
Okay, that's fair.
And by the way, we haven't even mentioned Carson Beck. We mentioned him once. Him once. He might win the damn Heisman Trophy.
Yeah, he's ridiculous and moves crazy well, is accurate, is poised, and with whatever he had early on last season in terms of new quarterback adjustment period, he became exponentially more comfortable week over week last year, and it showed.
It absolutely showed. One of the things that our friend Bill Connolly talked about in his preview of Georgia was just how effective Georgia is at working the middle of the field, in between the hashes. And we could talk about that a little bit maybe when we get to the Jalen Milroe part of our conversation here in part 3. But to throw over the middle is extremely difficult. There's just more that can go wrong. There are more guys in the middle of the field. And Carson Beck completed something like 75% of his passes across the middle of the field. That's on top of what they were able to do in the running game, where they run between the tackles and can beat you up over the middle. So there's just so many different ways this team can beat you. Carson Beck was very responsible with the football last season. We had a couple instances a year ago where we were curious what Beck would look like when they turned more of the offense over to him. I remember, I want to say it was either the Kentucky or the Missouri game, especially last season, where we talked about what is Carson Beck going to look like if they take away the running game. He was superb more often than not. I have no reason to expect otherwise this season. So for me, from where I sit, Georgia is the most proven quantity in this entire conference. Yes, the schedule is more difficult. No, I would not be surprised to see them drop a game, but they are still unequivocally my conference favorite and the team that I've gotten coming out of the SEC.
Yeah. I mean, they did play more competitive games last year than they did the couple years prior. And it was Georgia Tech. They were a little bit careless late, and that was somewhat of a game. Mizzou went toe-to-toe with them for a good chunk of that game. They lose to Bama in the SEC championship game. So slightly more human. If there's anything that was a danger last year, is you could run on them a little bit. And Auburn was creative with it. Like you could get some plays moving the ball on the ground against this Georgia team, and definitely wasn't the case those couple years prior. And no more Coach Boom, Ty.
No.
Will Muschamp, no longer defensive coordinator.
All right, so you had Ole Miss in your SEC title game.
Yes.
Ole Miss has an over-under of 9.5 this year. They were 11-2 a year ago. Beat Penn State in the Peach Bowl, lost to Bama and Georgia. And that was sort of my hang-up when we talked about Ole Miss on the last episode, that in those games in particular, they weren't especially close. Is this the year for Ole Miss? Because they've got a ton back, a huge haul in the portal. Lane Kiffin, as I said last episode, not just using the portal to plug holes. He did do it for those reasons, but he also did it to stack depth. Got a lot of depth. In some positions, that's more the case than others, but in this new era of the sport now where you might end up playing more games, depth is kind of its own currency. I think Ole Miss is set up really, really well there. Stands to reason you could get a boost from year number 2 under Pete Golding running the defense. The schedule, kind of beautiful. It seems set up for at least 9 wins, in all likelihood, maybe 10 or more. I understand the optimism around Ole Miss, but again, I come back to, is this the year? And what will change, if so, to make it that year?
Okay, well, I think the offensive line is going to get better, which was a weak point last year. I think Jackson Dart, I mean, he's dealt with some offseason procedures, I believe, or treatment, whatever the word you want to look for. He was beat up last year, and maybe that played a role, which, by the way, quick little apology if you want to play the sound, the boop, boop, ba-doop. I feel like I was a little bit unfair to Baron Morton given that I didn't bring up his AC joint injury last year. And as somebody currently suffering from a much better injury than what I'm sure Baron Morton was suffering from, my sympathies, and hopefully he's back. And I was more aware of it looking at Jackson Dart, who was beat up all of last year and gutted through a bunch of these games. But Ole Miss in their wins, they weren't running away from a lot of teams. And when I'm looking for like that next step, I'm looking for more comfortable wins against quality teams. And I think it is a skill to win and win those close games, beat against Auburn or Texas A&M or whatever. But these are, the final year of Jimbo and an interim situation. It's year one of Hugh Freeze. And I don't know. I feel like Ole Miss should be further along if we're going to consider them a true contender. And you're absolutely right to bring up not being competitive at all against Alabama, those final three quarters, and certainly the whole game against Georgia. But Ole Miss being as proactive as they have been in the portal, stacking receiving talent, which I think will only make them more dangerous, and I still think they're going to be dangerous on the ground without Quinshon Judkins. We'll see along the offensive line. I think they got 2 of Washington's offensive linemen from last year inside, so hopefully that helps. That was a line that won the Joe Moore Award. And I think Jackson Dart is the big question to me. If he is clearly better, and I thought he was good. I thought he was really good last year. But if he has taken that next step to where he, given these receivers, given what the position this defense should put them in, given their schedule, like Jackson Dart should be at least, fringe all SEC quarterback, fringe Heisman, given Lane Kiffin's success on offense. I don't think that's a crazy thing to say, given his experience, on this roster in college football and coming back. So I like Ole Miss a lot. I really, really do. I think the firepower is there. I think they're going to get after the quarterback better. I like the portal moves they made on defense. Walter Nolan is that big move in the middle where he should be a lot more disruptive against the run, which Ole Miss can definitely stand to be more disruptive against the run. I think it's great. I think the big danger they pose is just like so much speed everywhere on this offense. And the danger to themselves is protecting Jackson Dart and perhaps playing down to teams at times. Because I think the defense is going to still get better. I think there's still a ton of room to improve. And I think they've addressed enough there that they will. It's to me, and what Princely, I
want to hear you say it. Can you try and say it?
Uman
Mielen.
Uman Mielen. There you go. I just call him Princely.
Uman Mielen.
Yeah. Uman Mielen.
What's really cool about the Florida, or his entry on the Florida team website.
Yeah.
And they're starting to do more of this, which I think is a good thing, especially for idiots like me.
Mm-hmm.
You can actually play a voice file, a sound file of that player.
Oh, I appreciate that. That's really
pronouncing
cool.
their own name, so you know it's legit.
Yeah. And I haven't even mentioned Juice Wells, by the way, in terms of the embarrassment of riches on offense transferring in from South Carolina. So schedule-wise, look, Ole Miss has Georgia and then a bye, and then they're at Florida. If you're going to play both of those teams, and play in the swamp is always difficult in its own way, that's a good way to do it. Kentucky at South Carolina, which again I'm not looking past. At LSU, certainly not looking past with some of Ole Miss's recent defensive issues, and then they get a bye before Oklahoma. It's not an amazing schedule, but all things considered, missing the teams that they miss, I think it's pretty great. Considering their experience, considering their depth at this moment, I think they're in a great position.
Do you think if Jackson Dart gets drafted into the NFL, he'll still do the Anakin Skywalker eye black thing?
I should hope so. Yeah.
I feel like that's kind of his brand at this point.
Yeah.
Look, if the defense improves, if the defense takes a jump forward in year 2 under Pete Golding.
And they weren't bad. This was like a top 40-ish defense.
No. They weren't bad at all. But it is still the thing that I think comes up most frequently when you talk to people about Ole Miss and how they feel or don't feel.
Yeah.
If the defense takes a step forward under Pete Golding in year 2, watch out. Schedule set up well.
They need to do, like, the pass rush was pretty good. They weren't terrible at anything. If they can get excellent at something, right? Stuffing everybody on the ground, getting after the quarterback, erasing things and getting back to like a land shark look, which look, they're very active. I mentioned offensive line, very active in the portal at DB as well. Then that's when they become truly a dangerous program. If they can do something excellently on defense, which is, I think, what's been holding them back. They haven't had that thing. So we'll see.
You mentioned the Florida Gators.
Yeah.
I spent 2.5 hours studying the Florida Gators.
I'm so sorry.
4.5 is the over-under. 5-7 last season. Missed a bowl for the first time since 2017. It's no wonder Billy Napier is on the hot seat coming into this year. And, man, that 4.5 line, it's just shockingly low for a historically successful program like this.
Yeah.
To see that number, even for people like you and me who do this all the time and we're always on the lookout for news and we understand trajectories of programs and that number knocked me back. It really
Maybe it's
did.
just a sucker bet type number, right? That you're just trying to lull people in.
It could be. We know that over-unders are greatly influenced by schedules. Oklahoma, who we're going to talk about next episode, is another really good example of that. A team that might be better, but whose win-loss record could be worse. That's why they're a 7.5. Florida is projected to have the toughest schedule in America. And for that reason alone, it looks pretty bleak for Billy Napier making it through this season. The irony, though, is that when you look at Florida in a vacuum, separate from the schedule, they've got the hallmarks of a team that take a step forward almost everywhere.
Okay.
It's just a question of whether or not their strides that they take forward are offset by 4-8 or 5-7 record. Might not be able to see it because of the schedule.
That number could also be that number. Sorry to interrupt, Ty, because every year we see it in major conferences, minor conferences, whatever. That it starts out poorly, somebody gets rid of a coach, or even they don't get rid of the coach, and just the wheels fall off.
The wheels
fall
fall
off. That it's just a reality.
Go ahead. And there's a lot of wheels falling off potential because of the schedule. I talked about that UCF game in, week 4 or 5, pretty early in the season. That to me could be one of those games. But that aside, I came out of my Florida study feeling somewhat optimistic about where the team is headed, at least directionally.
Okay.
For one, they were super young last season, and they got a lot from their freshmen. You know the saying, freshmen become sophomores. Another year in the system, I think, should help raise the floor for the Gators. I also think Florida will be pretty dangerous on offense, at least more dangerous on offense. For all the eye rolling that I did, especially about Graham Mertz a year ago, he was really good.
Yeah.
Just 3 interceptions, completed 73% of his passes. And that's despite a line that gave up a sack 1 out of every 10 dropbacks, which is crazy and was 115th in the nation. So looking back, say what you want about Billy Napier, absolutely a good move to bring in Graham Mertz and give him the keys. So now he's back. Graham Mertz is back. You add in DJ Lagway, their big-time recruit, into the quarterback room. Maybe we'll see him a bit this year. I would expect we would. He does not have the pressure of having to be the true freshman going through this gauntlet of a schedule, trying to resurrect the program, trying to keep Billy Napier employed by the university. I think that's a good situation for him. Can use him in spots.
Agree.
Trevor Etienne transfers out, but Montrell Johnson, who actually led the team in rushing,
it's good.
He's back. The receiver room is stacked. This was not an explosive offense last season. That's an obvious area where I think they need to improve. They've said as much. But my sense is that, barring injury or any kind of unforeseen circumstances, this is a top 20, top 25 caliber offense. They should be pretty good, Dan. They really should.
I assume so, yeah. I mean, they were between 40 and 50 last year, returning what they return. I don't think that's a crazy thing to say. I don't know. I mean, if the offensive line is better, then yeah, they weren't great against.
They got to get the line
rush.
sorted out, right? If they're dangerous for all the reasons I described, they're in danger because the line.
It's just too leaky, yeah.
The line stats from last season were lousy. They were very bad in pass protection, better in the run game, but the line, first and foremost, is central to what Billy Napier wants to build. He is on the record saying as much. He wants to play the physical running game. He wants that to be the main thing. And it kind of has been. You could see maybe that he's trying to make it so, but the line just has not been there. I think it'll be better this year. I think it has to be better this year. But if they're in danger, at least at this point as we record this in late July, early August. That's why. That's the main reason. All that being said, okay, I am burying the lead.
Please.
In a big-time way. Florida is in danger if it cannot figure out this damn defense.
Yeah.
It's been the running joke for how many years? 2 years now?
Yep.
This was a bad defense headed into last season. It was bad defense coming out of last season. Billy Napier went with like a near full line change on the coaching staff. Kept Austin Armstrong, but added Ron Roberts, who I think previously was Armstrong's mentor. So they're two guys who know the same system.
Right.
Along the line, we've already talked about losing guys like Princely Uman said it the wrong way.
Princely's fine.
Uman Mielen, excuse me.
Uman Mielen, yeah.
Lose him in the portal to Ole Miss. But they also did some good work in the portal. They plugged some holes. Cormani McLean, former five-star, comes down from Colorado.
Wow.
We'll see.
Wow. Yeah.
We'll see. Joey Slackman, my token transfer from a small Ivy League school who I'm overly excited to see, comes in from Penn. LJ McCray, big-time get in the recruiting game on the defensive line.
Yeah.
Like top-rated defensive lineman in the country. Shamar James still back at linebacker. It does not feel like a talent thing, Dan Rubenstein. The talent is there. Talent's there. If they can't get the talent organized enough to get better on defense, that's on them.
I think the talent's there to like compete for the ACC. I just think you look at their opponents and how their opponents recruit and how their opponents are stacking depth on defense and finding more than just, a game-changing receiver. Like that's the difference to me.
Well, look,
is that there are pieces, but not a grouping, not a palette.
I'm not talking about winning the conference.
No, I know.
I'm talking about getting to a damn bowl game.
I know. I hear you. Even
the talent is there for that. This is a brutal schedule. Any way you want to measure this, it is a brutal schedule. But the talent is on this team to go to a bowl. And if they don't, and if it collapses, this is on the coaching staff. It would be the right move to get Billy Napier. It probably would have been the right move last year to get rid of Billy Napier. But they gave him another bite at the apple here, and the talent's there. So if it does not come to fruition, if they do not take some stride forward, it's on him, even against a brutal schedule.
I agree.
The schedule, by the way, is a joke. I mean, it's just,
walk me through it.
First 3 games are home. Against Miami, against Samford, against Texas A&M. Two teams of those 3 that are very difficult.
Yeah.
Next week on the road at Mississippi State, that should be a win. I hope that's a win before a bye week. Then comes that home game against UCF, which is a week before the Tennessee matchup. And I could see that UCF game being very consequential because I think
KJ Jefferson beat him last year, right?
KJ Jefferson beat him last year.
Yeah.
That's a UCF team that could be dangerous for many of the reasons we described in our Big 12 preview episodes. I would not look past that game, and I would not count that as a gimme. But then you're like, at Tennessee, home against Kentucky, neutral site against Georgia, at Texas, home against LSU. These are all in a row, by the way. Home versus Ole Miss, and then they close out the year at Florida State. You got to be kidding me. They've got Georgia and Texas on back-to-back weeks. Their November is a car crash. This schedule is brutal. It is the hardest in the nation. There should not be any debate over who else's might be more difficult. This is the toughest, far and away.
Okay, can I ask you this?
Ask me whatever you want. It's your show.
If I'm going to tell you that I am a time traveler, I've come back from December, which is when you always say that we'll know more by. And I tell you, you know what? I'm not going to tell you what Florida's record is. I'm not going to tell you how they did in these games, but I'm going to tell you this. They were legit pretty good this year.
Yeah.
What is to you, what does that mean record-wise? Like if Florida is legit pretty good, they could start out the season 5-0. Right?
Yeah.
These are beautifully blue and orange colored Florida Gator glasses I'm now putting on, right?
Sure.
If they're legit pretty good, that they're not careless with the ball, that Trey Wilson has big games, that the defense comes together a little bit more and they're fine, they're not amazing. They can beat Miami at home, Samford, Texas A&M at home. They can go on the road and beat a new Mississippi State, and they can beat UCF at home.
Yeah.
It gets trickier from there. So let's say they lose to Tennessee, and and they lose at home to Kentucky and they lose to Georgia. They're 5-3. They lose to Texas, but beat LSU. So that's 6-4. Beat Ole Miss 7-4, and then beat a struggling Florida State team who has taken a step back on offense and finished 8-4.
To answer your question,
yeah,
I think quote unquote legit good Florida against this schedule relative to their talent on hand, because legit good Florida still isn't going to go 10-2 against this.
Right, that's what I'm saying. I think they're fully capped at 8-4.
Yeah, and they're fully capped at 8-4, 7-5.
Okay,
and that would take a huge step forward.
That's
by the way, that'd be a huge step forward. I do think you have to look at this within context, because if they go 7-5 or 8-4 against this, that represents a major stride forward, and that would be a big deal for Billy Napier. I don't think they could fire him if he went 7-5, 8-4 against this, because that would represent so much of a positive step forward. I don't think they could do it. Now,
I think he should get a raise at 6-6.
You can make that case.
It's ridiculous.
You can make that case. There's a whole separate conversation about whether the powers that be at Florida still feel invested in Billy Napier. And so I'm curious to see what happens if they encounter some headwinds through the first 5-6 weeks of this season, because that UCF game looms pretty damn large.
I agree.
So I like Florida more than I expected. I don't see how you can like them in any significant way to get beyond 7-5. I understand the logic if you want to go over 4.5. I do. I think they'll be better than some are expecting, but don't expect them to go 9-3. There's just no chance against this schedule.
No, I know. I think the rosiest colored glasses get you to 8-4.
So that's my Florida take.
Okay. We're going A&M?
Yeah, let's go A&M, actually. 7-6 last year. They got rid of Jimbo. They lost to Oklahoma State in the bowl game. I looked at A&M. You looked at them in more detail than me. But I looked at them and I said, is it just me or should they be pretty good this year? You know, like, what is the range of Texas A&M outcomes this season?
Right. So I think you start with the fact that I think we agree that they're getting a coaching upgrade, an in-game coaching upgrade, a vision upgrade, a coach who is willing to adjust, a coach who is willing to take in more ideas. And I think there is reason to be confident that Mike Elko, especially given his experience as both a head coach and as a major coach at Texas A&M, that they will lose fewer winnable games than the Jimbo Fisher Texas A&M.
I'd agree with that, yeah.
So it's very difficult for me to see, even with what I think is a pretty difficult schedule, considering they start with Notre Dame, it's very difficult for me to see this A&M team not making a bowl. Like, I don't think they have a loss to App State in them. Like, I think they're going to be a better run program, and they're just going to win what they should win inside of a game, not how we look at a team. So floor and ceiling, I have as 6-6 floor, 9-3 ceiling.
I wrote down the exact same thing for
Yeah, buddy. Digital high five.
For Texas A&M. I mean, there's still a lot of talent on hand, even after they lost so much in the portal.
31 guys.
I think it speaks to the draw of Mike Elko and that vision that they were able to bring a lot of talent back in to kind of backfill and have the roster in a pretty good spot. It does not feel like they are starting over from a talent standpoint. Maybe philosophically so.
I think depth-wise, they are a bit.
Depth-wise, okay. Yeah, they were hit a little bit on depth, but generally speaking, from a talent standpoint, they're still really talented. There's obvious investment in this program. And Elko has been a guy who's been very, very good coaching up defense, but has proven in his short time as a head coach that he knows how to get more out of less. So you put a guy like that in a situation like A&M, that over under 8.5 makes a little bit more sense. The range of outcomes, though, that won't come into more focus until we have health answers about Connor Wegman, until we see this team out there.
Well, that's the whole thing. Yeah, even Jalen Henderson was fine last year, given the weird situation he entered into with, Connor Wegman going down and Max Johnson going down, and Jalen Henderson looking like a more viable weapon. Look, the offensive line has been an issue. They've retooled it. They've brought in transfers. They lose, a couple of literally gigantic defensive linemen, Walter Nolan, LT Overton. I don't know. They just bring back enough promise that, given Mike Elko as a defensive guy, again, we'll get to Jay Bateman in a second, that talent-wise, they're in a good place. Superstars, we'll see. Yeah. Losing Evan Stewart on offense, I still think there's enough dudes at receiver that excite me. There's enough youth. Moose Muhammad steps into a bigger role there. Reuben Owens I really like as a big running back. I think that could be, a nice battering ram in the way that, Duke has had success on the ground and Kansas State has had success on the ground under Colin Klein, new offensive coordinator. I think it's going to be a balanced offense. It's Connor Wegman health. I just hope he's lucky, right? At a certain point, he's just been unlucky. I don't know if he's, frail and made of glass. I don't think that's the case. I think he is just, some guys are just snake bitten, and you have to approach that as a concern given his injury history. But if he can stay healthy, I think so much of what A&M has been through these last couple of years has been self-inflicted, that literally just eliminating that is the difference between, losing to Auburn and beating Auburn, losing to Ole Miss and beating Ole Miss, losing to, I guess it was Ole Miss last year, the shootout game, that they'll just win more. And so I like too much of this team's potential to be down on the fact that they had 31 transfers. They bring in 28 transfers, Des Ricks, at corner coming in. I don't know. My thing that is a danger right now is, aside from, Connor Wegman health, I think Jay Bateman might have a little bit of like Ted Roof, like bring him in early, let him take the lumps when it doesn't go well on defense, early for a defensive head coach, but it's really kind of the defensive head coach's defense. Like, he wasn't good at North Carolina. He wasn't mostly not good at Army. Like, I don't know. I felt like at Texas A&M, when you have the resources to bring in a big name coordinator, like, or somebody from a big name defense or something like that, that was a contributing coach, like, you do it. And I'm not sure I get this. Maybe I'm wrong about Jay Bateman, but his track record suggests that he's either been crazy unlucky or has not. And he was at Army, by the way, when they were running an option. And
that's right.
It's one of the most advantaged places to call a defense, because your defense generally gets a ton of rest if you have a successful offense. I don't know. That one gave me, pet charity cause for pause there. But from a talent perspective, it's still depth in this moment. I think he's going to recruit crazy well. And he's already started recruiting crazy well.
He's already started recruiting. Can I pause you and ask you a question?
Please do.
A&M hosts Notre Dame in week 1.
Yeah.
It's the marquee matchup of week 1.
Yeah.
We haven't done a Notre Dame preview yet. Obviously, I'm going to be a little bit more plugged in on the Notre Dame side than you, and that's fine. I don't blame you. Who would you pick in that matchup?
Is there a spread, or do you want me to just...
I think A&M's favored by about 2, but for our purposes here, just consider it even.
I'd probably lean in this moment A&M, because it's at home in a pretty difficult place to play, because what they'll look like is going to be more mysterious. Now, Notre Dame has their own mystery on offense, given new old coordinator, and Riley Leonard, who is coming off of injury and Mike Elko is very familiar with. I think I like the current A&M offensive pop upside more than Notre Dame's. And considering it's at home, considering the mysteriousness, considering Marcus Freeman in big games against good teams, I think Mike Elko's a better head coach than Marcus Freeman. That's not a take, right?
No.
I'll give the edge without fully diving into matchups to A&M in this moment.
It's a fascinating matchup.
Yeah,
and I understand why the point spread is where it is. And this is not a Notre Dame preview. Obviously, we're talking about A&M and a bunch of
SEC can be, Ty.
Here.
It's our show.
No, but I think for both teams, the significance of that game cannot be overstated.
Yeah, it's gonna be great.
If you're A&M, you win that game at home against a top 10 team. Suddenly, expectations are dramatically different. Suddenly, that 8.5 over/under looks very attainable. At 9-3 kind of plateau looks a little bit more attainable because you're beating a team of that caliber at home. Notre Dame factors to be a playoff contender this year, even if they lose that A&M game. So, right. And on the Notre Dame side, obviously, if you go on the road, place like College Station, that would be a milestone for somebody like Marcus Freeman to get the monkey off his back, win a big game like that on the road against a team that I think will be, we believe will be nationally ranked by the end of the season. Big game of week 1. Just curious to get your take on that.
So, yeah, their schedule is such that there's no obvious killer back-to-back on this schedule. There's difficulties, and, how good is South Carolina? Well, if they're actually, we'll get there, but if Lenora Sellers is really good, then LSU, South Carolina in consecutive weeks could be very difficult, right? If the Auburn offense gets better, traveling to Auburn before hosting Texas could be very difficult. But as it stands now, Texas A&M has no Georgia, Tennessee, Ole Miss, and Oklahoma, for whatever you believe in Oklahoma. But you also kind of have to look at it through the lens of who might be beatable in terms of the good teams. So schedule's pretty good, and there's a lot of, I'll use the word again, there's a lot of buttressing, Ty, or a lot of what's the word? I'm buffering, not buttressing, buffering, right? There's a buffer zone between Florida and the rest of the SEC schedule in Bowling Green. There's Arkansas, Mizzou, Mississippi State. That's not terrible. Mississippi State before LSU, which is now no longer the rivalry game because Texas A&M is Texas, obviously. South Carolina, LSU, we'll see. They get New Mexico State, which I guess beware, but this is not Jerry Kill, Diego Pavia.
No.
And Auburn, Texas. We think Auburn's going to be pretty good, but it's not Georgia, Texas. It's not Bama, Texas. So, I don't know. It's no Bama too, right? For A&M? Yeah.
No
Bama.
No Bama.
So, I don't know. All things considered, it's been a pretty good offseason for Mike Elko.
Let's talk about the Missouri Tigers. 9.5 over under.
Can't wait.
11-2 a year ago. They beat Ohio State 14-3 in the low-scoring Cotton Bowl.
Yes.
Big deal last year. One of the stories of the year. I am extremely high on Missouri with some qualifiers.
Okay.
That I can get into here. But a lot back. 17th nationally returning productions, the easiest schedule in the SEC. As I said on part 1, the 37th most difficult schedule in the country. So not the easiest schedule by any stretch in the world, but as compared to their other conference mates, yeah, it's the easiest schedule. They should be favored in 10 or 11 of their games.
Agree.
This season. My dilemma with Mizzou is whether this is a better team or TV show.
Okay.
What do I mean by that? All right.
The Luther Burden experience?
I think they're dangerous basically because the entire offense is back. Save for Corey Schrader, the running back,
Cody Schrader,
who's a big loss, and I think they lose one guy along the offensive line as well. But everybody who caught a pass last season is back, including Luther Burden. Brady Cook, who had a renaissance year last year, he is back. Either Nate Knoll or Marcus Carroll, two guys that they got from the group of 5 from App State and Georgia State, respectively. One of those guys figures to be the Schrader replacement. I don't have many questions about the offense, Dan. They scored 32 points a game last year. There's a good chance they're pushing 35 this season. It should be one of the best 10 offenses in the nation, full stop. Okay? I don't have any questions there. My questions are about the defense. There's a lot of turnover on defense, and I think it's worrying, right? Not the least of which is Blake Baker, the aforementioned, prized, perhaps overpaid coordinator for LSU now. Yeah, well, we will see. We will see. But they lose him. They lose 3 solid defensive backs, their best linebacker, their best edge rusher, and 3 of their 4 interior defensive linemen. There is a lot of turnover here. And even though I think Eli Drinkwitz did a really good job bringing in new talent via the portal and otherwise, I just worry that it might be too much for them to absorb.
Okay.
Best case scenario, it pops and Mizzou is legit top 10 team most of the year. Worst case scenario, they're a fun half team that plays in some shootouts and makes for good TV. Are they a TV show? Are they a team?
Right.
So the defense is really the only reason I'm not jumping on the over here, because I like Mizzou a lot. And like I said before, the schedule's great. The games that loom the largest are at Texas A&M and at Alabama. They're home against Oklahoma. They play sub teams. It's not like a cakewalk or anything.
Right.
But if you believe that Mizzou can win just one of those 3 games, then you bet the over, man. You bet the over. You hope there aren't any other hiccups along the way.
Yeah, I think all of that is right. I also sort of think that in this sport, we've seen enough that like success begets success.
Sure.
That like there is momentum. Sometimes coaches are not good enough to take advantage, whatever. I think Eli Drinkwitz has proven, especially with how he has sort of galvanized the money at Mizzou, right?
Yeah.
That they're competitive on the recruiting trail. They're competitive. They get like the most promising Oklahoma offensive lineman, right? Caden Green comes in, steps in to sort of bolster things. And I think he's relatively local to Mizzou. But you're right about concerns about the defense and new coordinator, losing key pieces. All of that is true. I think they're so advantaged on offense and they're well coached enough. And I just have this sense that Mizzou, given their schedule, given their offense, is, even if they're not as good as their final schedule indicates, their final record indicates, their final record is going to be really good.
I think they'll be good. I think they'll be a good team. And to the previous point of what are like the range of outcomes for Mizzou? The range of outcomes are pretty good.
Yeah.
And they're definitely skewing higher than they were Texas A&M. This is a good team. It's a great offense. They're going to score like crazy. And the only reason I can't get fully into Mizzou and go even more aggressive on my Mizzou takes is because of that defense.
Okay.
And even that, Dan, depending where you look and who you read, people have varying opinions about how much they actually lose, how much it will affect them versus won't affect them.
Mm-hmm.
If anything, that's the thing that everyone's pointed at. But even still, there is disagreement over how much of an issue that's going to be for this team this season. So, but otherwise on the schedule, like I mentioned, those 3 big games, A&M, Alabama, Oklahoma. Beyond that, Murray State, Buffalo, Boston College, and Vandy, all at home before a bye.
Right.
Also, at UMass, home against Auburn, at South Carolina, at Mississippi State, home against Arkansas. They drew the correct straw to try and make a run at this thing. This is easy by comparison. Still an SEC schedule, but easy, way easier than their peers by comparison. We just got to see on the defense. It's a defense thing.
My only question in this moment is, I think you're absolutely right. Who are the quarterbacks that are good enough, or at least that appear to be good enough in this moment on this schedule? Like, it's at A&M, so it's at Connor Wegman, who I think is pretty good. It's at Jalen Milroe in Alabama. I think he's a good quarterback. We'll see on Lenora Sellers. We'll see on Jackson Arnold. We'll see on Blake Shapen and Jeff Levy's offense. We'll see in Talon Green and Bobby Petrino's offense.
Thomas Castellanos, the big guy, right?
You're huge guy. 7'4", 418-pound Thomas Castellanos.
He grew a foot since we did the BC preview. Yeah,
Diego Pavia could be very challenging. And other Tim Beck offense, not the Tim Beck, other Tim Beck. Yeah.
I could talk about Vandy next. We got 2 teams left here that we're going to discuss.
But no Carson Beck.
No
Quinn Ewers. No Jackson Dart. No whatever you think of Garrett Nussmeier and LSU's what should be a really good offense. Like, good place, man. It's a good place.
No, it's a great place. It's a great place. And I almost felt guilty not being all in on Mizzou because we did that episode.
No Nico, right?
No, we did that episode a couple months ago. And we said Mizzou's projected as a top 10 team. And I could see them finishing as a top 5 team because of the schedule.
I love this hype.
I like them. I'm just very conflicted, and that's why I had them in my...
So what's your number, right? What is with this schedule? What is their over-under? What did you say, 9.5?
Over-under's 9.5. Over-under's 9.5. I'd still be inclined to go over. I'm not putting it in the volcano.
I'm putting it in the volcano.
You want it in the volcano?
Mizzou, 10 wins. Yeah.
Oh, more takes. Why it burns.
I don't even think it's that hot. I think it's a gentle warmth.
Close things out. We got 2 teams left.
Yes.
2 teams starting over in different respects. Mississippi State and Vandy. But you mentioned Vandy, so let me do Vandy.
Please.
2-10 last season. They only beat Hawaii and Alabama A&M, then they lost 10 straight. Not a great finish to the season for Clark Lee. The issue at Vandy is talent. It is not anything. It is a talent thing. And it's been tougher to recruit there because of the academics. You layer in the portal. For example, they lose their top 4 receivers. just makes the job harder. The lines have struggled. The pass defense especially has struggled the last few seasons. Clark Lee now has 2-10 seasons to his name in his time at Vandy. Overall, he's won just 9 games in 3 years.
With the 5-7 in there, Ty.
With the 5-7. The 5-7. So
Yeah.
Vandy's obviously in danger for all of these reasons and many more that I won't describe. I am not here to grave dance or spike the football on the doors. If you root for them, you already know. Here are the 2 reasons why they could be dangerous. They could at least be interesting this season. The first is something that you mentioned. Changes on offense. Tim Beck, the one from New Mexico State,
Yep.
not the other one, he comes over. He brought Diego Pavia with him at quarterback. He also brought Jerry Kill with him to be an analyst.
Yeah.
They also landed Nate Johnson, the quarterback from Utah, in the portal. It's going to be more of an option attack, which I don't think is the worst idea in the world.
Neither do I.
And I'm not an option guy, and it's not to say they're going to be Navy or Army overnight, but it's more of that. I don't think that's a horrible idea at a place like Vandy. You need the line play in order to make it work, which they have not had. But I like thinking out of the box here.
Okay.
And if nothing more, it makes it interesting, right? Diego Pavia makes it. He had the helmet twisted around. He runs hot. What's not to love about Diego Pavia?
I'm with you.
I think that whole offense and some of the changes that Clark Lee is trying to make there make this team interesting. And the second is that Clark Lee is now taking over the reins on defense, where he's got a good track record for being a coordinator. We are probably nearing the end of his run at Vandy.
I hope not, but yeah.
I hope not either. I'm not rooting for it. But if and when that happens, he can kind of pick a spot as a coordinator, right? Like somebody would hire him with a moment's notice.
Sure.
So maybe he makes that defense more interesting. Again, it's just a talent thing for Vandy. Do they got the horses to contend in this now 16-team conference where they don't have the easiest schedule, where they lost 10 straight a year ago, where their over-under is 3 this season? They have the lowest over-under in the SEC. Again, I'm not here to spike the football.
Yeah.
Those are at least are 2 reasons why they could be somewhat dangerous or at a minimum interesting.
Yeah, they're going to be overlooked. There are teams on their schedule as I pull it up, but as I remember it, like there are teams who could fall apart. There are teams who you could see having a very definitive weakness that they can't figure out. And if Vandy is better coached because of Jerry Kill, because Clark Lee has his fingerprints on the defense more than he's had, I think he's like, they've recruited pretty well. They've lost a lot of those good recruits to other schools. I think the eye for talent is good, and there is something about merely being overlooked and feeling like you have nothing to lose that could make Vandy a little bit dangerous. I thought they were going to be more dangerous than they were last year, and there was, AJ Swan, and they were trying to be a little more direct with things, and they didn't really match up, and they couldn't get it done. So obviously there was some sort of behind-the-scenes messaging that said, we need to bring in more players, and I know we don't always do this, and we need to bring in somebody who can help. And I know as things fell apart at New Mexico State that it became an attractive place. I think Jerry Kill didn't even go in with the idea of like trying to get hired as like an offensive coordinator or something like that. He was just like, what about, these guys? What about these guys? What about hiring me?
No.
I got nothing to do. Let's win some football games. And so
I hope it works. I
hope it's a good marriage. I do.
I hope it works. But Vandy's got an uphill climb, just as they always have.
Hope it works out. It'd be cool if they went to a bowl game, but it's real difficult to see with the schedule and where the conference is right now.
From an over-under of 3 to an over-under of 4 with Mississippi State, Dan, bring us home. Mississippi State, 5-7 last year. They fired Zach Arnett, who our friends over at Athlon mistakenly referred to in their magazine as Will Arnett, different Arnett.
GMC. Yeah, continue.
All signs point to this being a rebuilding year for the Bulldogs. What does the immediate future look like? What does it look like in the medium and longer terms based on whatever indications we have now through just a couple months of the Levy regime?
Right. We know what this offense is going to be, obviously, given his time at UCF, given his time at Oklahoma. We know that they're going to play pretty quickly. We know that they're going to try to get the ball to receivers quickly and, play with a good kind of reckless abandon, as Jeff Lebby offenses have. If receivers that they've brought in from the portal and that they've recruited recently work out and they're somewhat explosive, then there's a little bit of danger to them, right? There's danger in a good way for Mississippi State. They already play in a difficult place to play. There are pieces along this defense that are interesting. They lost a couple big linebackers, of course, highlighted by Bookie Watson last year. But there are enough pieces up front on defense to make them interesting if they can stay healthy. They're going to be running a 3-4, so they're switching away from Zach Arnett's 3-3-5, so a new base, but most teams play nickel anyway. It's Coleman Hutzler who comes in, who's actually has a really impressive special teams background as well, but he comes in from Alabama most recently, where he's coached, I believe, linebackers. So new system. It's a year zero situation. It's been a weird situation altogether because of Mike Leach's passing and how that sort of changed the schedule and coaching apparatus in Starkville. So I don't know. I think they're being very smart about how they're approaching things. Blake Shapen is not looked at as like a high ceiling guy, but he's a guy with experience and was in a pretty bad situation at Baylor offensively last year. So we know the best of Blake Shapen is decently good. And so you pair that with a very quarterback-friendly system. The big question for Mississippi State is, what do they look like in year 2, year 3, right? This year is kind of a wash. We'll see. You get what they're going for with Jeff Lebby, that they're trying to, hire from the Lane Kiffin tree and, a younger guy, fun offense, and hopefully that resonates in state. Hopefully he'll continue to recruit pretty well, which I think he will. So the danger is just that they don't have the pieces, they don't have the star power, and it's going to take a minute to rebuild this roster because last year clearly didn't work out. And they should be able to find it on both sides of the ball. We've seen the best of Mississippi State this past, decade, 15 years or whatever. You can find top-level offensive skill. Sometimes they're named Fred, which I always appreciate. You find all-American caliber defensive linemen, linebackers, whatever, corners. Like, you can absolutely find an 8-4 team in Starkville. And so if they're smart about how they build the offense, if the hires continue to be sound, Jeff Lebby, hiring Jeff Lebby as offensive coordinator is a good first step. I think their ceiling this year, their danger is that they're fun and nobody figures out how to stop them quickly enough in a game and they lose. But making a bowl game is a big ask this year. But, if they're in that 5-7, 6-6 range and playing for something late, that's interesting to me. Sure, absolutely.
Write in solidverbal@gmail.com. Let us know what we got right, what we got wrong. If you are on any of the platforms that allow you to comment, we'd love to hear your comments. Be nice, but generally, we'd love to hear what you have to say about what we got right, what we got wrong.
At least if you're going to criticize Ty, I just need the preamble of, look, we can all agree Ty is handsome and charming, but
I could deal with that. All right.
Yeah,
If you give me that, that we can.
Ty seems like a great guy, but I don't know. His take on Mizzou is such that. That's all.
I know. We're gonna get a lot of you didn't do your homework on so. That's okay. Part of the game here. We all got to play at this time of year. We're excited to play it. Look, we're halfway through all teams in the SEC. On our next episode, on part 3, we're going to do Alabama and LSU, Tennessee and Oklahoma, Kentucky and Auburn, and then close things out with South Carolina and Arkansas. Hope you'll be here with us. Make sure you hit follow or subscribe if you have yet to do so. Going out to verballers.com if you want to find out more about our Patreon community, our exclusive community of hardcore verballers who get to listen to bonus episodes and ad-free content, get access to our Discord server. We've got College Football 25 Dynasties spinning up. Dan, I need to talk to you about our recruiting strategy, by the way, at Miami. Okay. We'll talk about that offline a little bit.
All right.
Got some news to share with you on that front.
All right. Can't wait.
And of course, follow us on social media and send us those emails at solidverbal@gmail.com.
That's all I have, Ty.
Part 2 officially in the books for the SEC. One more to go here, where it just means more. For that guy, Dan Rubenstein, for myself, Ty Hildenbrand, I'll talk to you all in a few days. Stay solid.
Peace.